Were you ever called overly sensitive, shy, or a perfectionist growing up? But maybe that didn't seem like the full picture. Today, I'm breaking down 10 big reasons autistic women and girls slip through the cracks, as well as female autistic ADHDers. The last one, even professionals admit they still don't fully understand it, in men or women. Let's dive in. Labeled as sensitive or shy instead. Let's start in childhood. A lot of autistic girls grow up with their traits brushed off as personality quirks. Labels that stick like shy or quiet or overly sensitive or emotional. That's how it might look on the outside, and that's not only for autistic girls. Studies show that girls are still missed for at least 2 years longer than autistic boys, partly because of vague labels like these. So instead of help, they got stuck with labels that explained and solved nothing. Sensory sensitivities got dismissed or hidden. Lights too bright, clothes too itchy or tight, trying to keep up with a conversation that's moving way too fast, having a super restrictive diet because of food textures or sensitivities. For autistic women, sensory overwhelm is constant, but pointing it out often earns labels like dramatic or difficult, or even worse, hormonal. And if you get dismissed enough, you're probably just not going to say anything until it becomes a huge issue. But when you look around and see the same fashions, smells, and environments don't seem to bother other people, you might be guessing it all yourself too. It's part of masking, which we'll talk more about later. But how this often looks for autistic girls is overload, simmering below the surface, getting upset over small things, but they weren't small. It was from other sensitivities that were making their brains work overtime. Same with distraction or zoning out. Often that lack of focus or distractibility is sensory overload. And for many autistic women today, they grew up in a time where that wasn't understood to impact them to the degree it probably did. And what looked like being moody could have been a shutdown or sensory overload. Hidden or subtle stimming. Instead of more obvious stims like hand flapping, many autistic women stim in ways society doesn't notice. Hair twirling, skin picking, chewing pens or nails, listening to the same song on repeat for hours or days. People see quirks, but they don't think it's autism. Even professionals often miss it because subtle stims don't match the stereotypes in the diagnostic manuals. So for a student I worked with, she loved to spin around and around in circles, also danced all the time. Sometimes it was when she was excited, and sometimes it didn't seem to match the situation, like when she was upset with a super serious look on her face. But now I know she did it to regulate, which is what stimming is all about for autistic people and many ADHDers. Self-regulation. But if you're growing up and told that is weird, you'll learn to hide it. So the stims are often small, like finger tapping in certain ways to calm down. One autistic woman shared with me one of the sneakiest stims I've ever heard. She learned to push her tongue on the roof of her mouth in a certain pattern as her stim when she was little. What do you notice? Ninja-like stealth stimming, hard for anyone to notice. And before we keep going, we've got a free reflection guide that's especially helpful if you're recently diagnosed or starting to consider autism. Links in the description. Meltdowns and shutdowns misinterpreted. Here's another big one. Autistic meltdowns and shutdowns often get brushed off as hormonal or emotional. This can happen for boys too, especially ones who keep their emotions in. But for high-masking girls and women, it's especially true. Crying quietly? She's just moody. Going silent for hours?
She's moody.
But these are autistic shutdowns. Explosive meltdowns are easier to spot, and they can happen for girls just like for boys. But many women and girls internalize them, so those might slip under the radar. For one neurodivergent girl I worked with long ago, it was slow and stealthy. She'd be doing great in class, chatting, excited, doing everything with tons of energy. But at a certain point in the day, she'd shut down or have an outburst. Sometimes she'd start crying. She got labeled as tired or emotional by teachers. And yes, she was tired, but she was having a meltdown. Overwhelmed by a lot, including the constant transitions at school and unfinished tasks. This was before her diagnosis, and doctors didn't think she could be autistic because she was bubbly and chatty. So these shutdowns and meltdowns got misunderstood and mislabeled. Autistic girls and women get missed. And then comes masking to fit in and crashing after. Friendship for many autistic individuals often might feel a lot like performing in a play without ever getting the script. And that's especially true for undiagnosed autistic individuals. Research shows autistic girls are very likely to mimic their peers, basically copying them to blend in. Researchers are starting to realize a lot of autistic boys do this too, but girls at very high rates, which is why they get missed. But you might ask, Doesn't everyone do that? No, it's not the same. Based on culture, we all learn about how to socialize. But autistic people are often memorizing lines or phrases or specific movements. For many autistic girls, it's copying how to walk, the specific facial expressions and tone of saying things, copying elements of personality like interest or fashion, even when they don't actually like them. That's because they don't understand how to fit in or how to do it. That's part of being autistic. So mimicry is a way to seem like we do. It's a form of masking. Teachers see well-adjusted. Parents see making friends. Meanwhile, internally, these autistic kids are thinking, am I doing this right? Should I laugh now? And these kids grow up to become adults. Then these habits become normal in adulthood. Masking everything, holding it together all day, then the mask falling off at home. Out in the world, capable, polished, maybe even social. At home, total shutdown, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling. For many women, they might not even feel like they can unmask, even at home, or they are so exhausted they might shut down. Families often don't connect the dots. It often stays hidden, or if it comes out at home, they might only see the crash, not the Oscar-worthy masking routine that caused it. Perfectionism plus people-pleasing. Were you a straight-A student who also couldn't say no to anything? That's not just you. Autistic women often develop perfectionism as camouflage and a coping mechanism, and it starts early. On the outside, dependable, organized, thriving. On the inside, constantly overwhelmed, but trying to keep it together with a smile. Panicking over small mistakes like a typo in an email. Stressing before sending any message, especially to a dreaded group chat. Ugh, I freaking hate those too. But for autistic people, it's sometimes not about being perfect, although our all or nothing thinking can sure make it feel that way. It's a way to control things in an unpredictable world. But it can also lead to other challenges, like with executive functioning, and then overwhelm, and then maybe a shutdown or meltdown. Throw ADHD into the mix, which we'll talk about more in a minute, and struggles with time and trying to do it all, those are common for autistic women. Autistic girls and women might also downplay or mask their real special interests, because talking about your obsession with crop yield or the exact timeline of 12th century architecture sounds weird. Not to me. That actually sounds pretty awesome. So instead, they might stick with talking about people or local news or surface-level conversation topics, not necessarily because they want to, but because that's what feels safer, or agreeing with everything rather than giving their own opinion. Masking covers everything, sometimes even joy and ideas. High IQ or academic success. A lot of late diagnosed autistic women were previously labeled gifted, but before that, especially if they had undiagnosed ADHD, it might have been smart but easily distracted. Talks at inappropriate times. Daydreams during class time. Translation: they ace spelling tests but misread social cues. Many autistic kids like this have a huge vocabulary and sometimes sound years ahead of their age when they talk. But for some autistic girls, they mask by not using all their words, which might get them singled out. They might adjust how they talk to fit in. They adapted and learned to mask. And that's also true for many autistic boys. The difference is that neurodivergent girls with high IQ are often doing so much below the surface that teachers, parents, and other experts don't notice the signs of struggle. Teachers assumed, she's smart, she'll be fine.
Yeah, and she's making lots of friends now.
Just because you were part of a group at recess didn't mean you felt like you fit in. So the high IQ often makes autistic girls acutely aware of being different. And then the lack of academic struggles means they don't get the support that they might if they were disrupted in class. The struggle was silent, but that doesn't mean it didn't happen. Then fast forward to adulthood, with some of these women pursuing degrees or careers that incorporate their interests, like in psychology, and being really successful in them, but still struggling with all the other parts of being autistic, like the ones we talked about before. Still appearing fine. And it's little wonder that so many neurodivergent women are still getting missed, or ending up with mental health mislabels. And when people did notice the struggles were real, for autistic women historically, it was almost never diagnosed as autism. Part of that links to how the diagnostic criteria shifted from a lot of categories, like Asperger's separate from other types of autism, to the autism spectrum in the DSM-5. But it also links to the huge number of other mental health diagnoses that studies find usually precede an autism diagnosis in women. These include anxiety, depression, borderline personality disorder. A 2020 review found that autistic women were far more likely than men to first receive a different mental health diagnosis before autism was ever considered. Or they are diagnosed with a co-occurring condition like chronic fatigue syndrome without further investigation into what else could be connected. like autism or ADHD. That can delay diagnosis for years, which delays understanding and also connects to misunderstandings of autism in women. Originally, the system itself wasn't built with women in mind. For decades, research samples were overwhelmingly male. Now, more and more studies are seeking to understand autistic women. But the irony is that studies show that autism diagnosis rates are far behind the real numbers in most countries, for males and females. That gives a much smaller pool to sample from for research, so they're still underrepresented in studies. And also keep another point in mind. People who are qualified to make diagnosis are still understanding autism more now too. The result? Stereotypes continue to exist, like autistic people can't make eye contact, or
They're fine being alone, so they don't want friends.
the person is so friendly and empathetic. No freaking way they could be autistic. Just because the person can have a conversation and appear comfortable. All of these still can get applied, and women continue to get overlooked. Spoiler, you can make eye contact and still be autistic. You just might hate every second of it, or you created a system for it. Yep, that can still be autism. Overlap with ADHD. And here's the twist. For some women, autism wasn't the first label. It was ADHD, or neither. Why? Because of new understanding of ADHD in recent decades too. It used to be the hyperactive kid who can't sit still. Now we know that there's also inattentive ADHD and other combinations. So you might get an ADHD diagnosis first because it's more recognized, but the autism piece still gets missed, even for you. And since you could only officially get a dual diagnosis since the DSM-5 updates in 2013, research on the autism-ADHD combo is still sparse, especially in women. Translation: professionals are basically playing catch-up and learning while you are at home coming here to our page and saying, wow, I relate so much to both. But the good news? You're not alone on this journey. New research keeps coming out about these topics, and as we share lived experience and research, you have a good spot to keep learning. Today is about understanding that there are many reasons you or your loved ones might have been missed. So if this hits for you and you're just trying to understand more about autism or the autism-ADHD combo, you're not broken, and you're definitely not alone. High-masking autistic women have always been here. The recognition is just a little late to the party. Drop a comment if any of this hits home, and stick around because I'll be diving deeper into ADHD overlap in a future video. I feel like I need a stylist. I don't know, should I go in the back with this? Front? Both front? How do we, one in the back?